First things first, does everybody have a little handheld voting device? Anyone who doesn't have one need one? All right, good. We're here to vote then. All right, so let's get started. This session is called Crowdsourced Market Insight, Grid and Consumer Analytics Top Trends 2014. And this is a session where you are the crowd in the crowdsourced element of this, and you provide the insights for us. So it's a good way to get the audience involved. It's a good way for us to have our panelists, instead of just presenting directly to you, have them react to how you're feeling about the questions we ask and the topics we raise here, and use that as a way to start a discussion, really a discussion in real time that is unrehearsed and unprepared. So we've done this before at our sessions, at our conferences, and it's always gone quite well. It's a good break from just having our analysts or other analysts present data to you. We're going to generate some real-time data, some market data here that's new to all of us, and that's what we'll be discussing over the next 45 minutes to an hour. So my panelists here with me are Emily Bylard, Director, Solutions Marketing at O-Power, and then Bud Voss, the President and CEO of Enbala Power Networks, David Hellawell, CEO at Pulse Energy, and Craig Boice, the President at Boice Dunham Group. So I'll have them make a brief introduction of who they are, what they do, their relationship to the soft grid, data analytics in the utility industry, and then we'll just jump right into the questions. And just a quick couple notes on the questions. When the slide goes up on the screen, we'll talk about the question itself, introduce it, and the answers, and then I will signal when you can vote. And you'll see a little 10 in the top right of the slide. And when that 10 starts counting down, you've got 10 seconds to vote. And within that time, you can change your vote. If you quickly change your mind or anything, you've got 10 seconds to cast a vote. And your final vote is the one that counts. And then right at the end of that 10 seconds, the slide will generate a bar chart with results. And then I'll go to the panelists to tell us how they voted, and then also react to how you voted, and have a discussion around the implications of that. Okay? So how about we start with you, Emily? You want to introduce yourself, and then we'll just come down the row here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Bylard, and at O-Power, I lead our energy efficiency business, which sits on top of our customer engagement platform. So as a company, we're really focused on enabling utilities to be better energy advisors and trusted advisors to their customer base. And energy efficiency is just one piece of that. So I spend a lot of my time understanding how utilities' relationship with their customers are changing, as well as the data and tools that they have available and need in order to affect that change.
Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Bud Voss. I serve as the President and CEO of Enbala Power Networks. I've had the pleasure of being in this broad industry for just over 15 years. However, I've only been with Enbala 5 months. I've been in this industry from demand response, load control, through to customer behavioral programs. And now I'm with Enbala, where it really focuses more on the grid side and using large customers, large demand, distributed energy, and truly providing a distributed energy operating system, if you will, for the grid services that we provide. And we'll talk a little bit about how analytics fits into that picture, because analytics is a big part of how do we actually provide those grid services.
Okay. My name is David Hellawell. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pulse Energy. My own analytics background goes to, in the 1970s, I played with punch cards when my dad, an economist, was doing computer models on a mainframe computer. Then in 94, I was an exploration geophysicist looking for oil and gas with Amoco, and I had a Cray workstation. Even then, that was big data with 3D seismic, more than most utilities generate, I'd argue. I started Pulse Energy in 2006, 2007, with my business partner, Greg Kerfoot, who was really a part of the creation of the business intelligence sector. He wrote some software called Crystal Reports. Crystal Decisions was the company that he was CEO of and sold on to Business Objects, then SAP. So really, Pulse Energy, we're focused on commercial customers with utilities around the world. We're now in 4 countries around the world, have over 1 million businesses in our system. And we help utilities to segment all their different business customers and subsegments, understanding what makes them tick, what they respond to, what they don't respond to, running energy efficiency programs. Also in deregulated markets, we help to reduce customer churn and keep customers loyal, but it's all driven by the same things of having a way to analyze the data to understand the customers.
I'm Craig Boice. I lead the Boice Dunham Group. We are strategists and market researchers for utilities and vendors and investors. I spend a lot of my time helping to design and construct big data programs, and then to get on the front end of that, leading focus groups, conducting in-home and in-business interviews with customers. This last year, I think I've led 40 or 45 focus groups and probably had 50 in-home interviews, with more to come this year. And at the moment, we're deeply involved leading the SGIG-funded Nevada dynamic pricing trial, which is about 5,000 households on new technology, thermostat-based, mobile game-based, time of use and critical peak pricing.
Good stuff. All right, we've got our panel. Now let's go to some questions. So the first one, it's about grid analytics versus consumer analytics. And I think largely when we talk about soft grid, we make these broad distinctions between grid analytics that provides or that analyzes data coming up from the grid itself, and then consumer analytics, be it residential or commercial industrial. So the customer usage behaviors and the data coming from their energy usage. And so between 2015 and 2020, what we're asking is then, where do you see the majority of technology evolution, applications, and value being created? So is it within the utility infrastructure, them understanding their own operations and their distributed assets and all the elements that come with grid analytics, or consumer analytics, really focusing on the customer and taking that analytics and turning it around by adding either new valuable services or resource planning, a variety of things that you could do with customer analytics. So, or neither, they will be relatively even. So those are the 3 choices. There are no wrong answers. And when you see it start counting down, you can vote, which is now. All right, so we don't have a little jingle to play or anything, but you have 10 seconds. And the answers will be generated. So it's somewhat even, and then there are people that chose even. So it's there's a little bias toward consumer analytics. Is that good news for you, Emily, or how do you feel about that? And how did you vote?
So no surprise to the folks in the room, I voted consumer analytics. I'd probably be in the wrong business if I didn't. When I look at the trends around the industry right now and the pressures being placed on utility, the customer is at the center of a lot of it. So the utility leaders that I talk to are spending a lot of time thinking about the challenges that distributed generation provide to their business, the challenges of increasing competition from folks like Comcast that are really moving into the energy services business. And in order to, and another challenge that utilities are facing is, in the US at least, is largely declining demand, as well as prices that have stagnated. And so when you take all of that together, in order to drive additional value as a business, the engaging customers is really important, and consumer analytics is a critical piece of that in order to be able to provide good energy advice to customers. And if they see you as their energy advisor, they're more likely to buy additional services and products from you, including your own version of solar and energy storage. So that's why I chose 2.
Good. All right. Bud, how'd you vote?
Well, I voted for number 3.
Yeah?
I know that sounds crazy because you would think the guy who just said everything about grid services would say grid analytics.
Yeah.
But the reality is that our power grid is in inversion, right? As we play this out to the limit, we're going to see distributed power take hold. And when distributed power takes hold and we flip the grid over, if you will, power generation is now at the end, there is value to be created everywhere. We're going to see our utilities change fundamentally. They're going to need analytics to know how to do that. We're going to see our end customers change. And it's not just about the services and the things that we can provide. It's simple things like, will the grid stay up? And that's both a customer problem and a utility problem. So I answered 3.
Yeah, that makes sense. We held our meeting of our Grid Edge Executive Council yesterday on analytics, and we, again, sort of crowdsourced. There's only 60 of them versus a few hundred. But as we went through and asked them to rank the values of analytics and the applications of those, it did end up being pretty evenly split, because when you're looking at the catalyst for it, distributed energy resources is probably one of the largest ones, and then resiliency, you end up needing analytics from the customer and the grid itself, and it's hard to say you should spend more on one or the other. So it looks like we're heading in that direction. But David, how did you feel about that?
Yeah, I guess no big surprise, consumer analytics, but I see there, because really it's 3 questions there, right? There's technology evolution, applications, and value being created. I think the value creation is actually fairly similar from both sides, because obviously you need the grid to be working, or nothing else matters. In terms of technology evolution and applications, the reason I think consumer analytics are just, not just a little ahead, but miles ahead in terms of how much is going to happen, is we're just at the very outer layers of the onion right now, and once we get a little bit better, there's going to be a whole new range of things that we haven't even thought about yet that are going to be possible. The technology is going to be changing on the consumer side as well, how they interact with utilities. That whole playing field changes more, I'd argue, in a couple of years than on the grid side would change in a decade or 2. So just the pace of change, I think, is really leaning to consumer analytics.
Right. How'd you feel?
I agree about the pace of change. I think the question's all about timing. And I voted grid analytics because right now there's a very clear mechanism for utilities to get grid analytics projects funded. Right now there are 2 groups who have not too much interest in knowing more about the consumer through advanced analytics, namely almost every utility and almost every regulator. Because for years they've had a dialogue that's been defined by what they don't know and therefore can assume between the 2 of them. Changing that to base that dialogue for rate setting, for program design, for bill design, on what people actually want, introduces a third party into that. And I don't think they're quite ready in most places for that across the country. But grid analytics, companies like Bud are delivering value today for that utilities can find the funding for.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good way to characterize that. All right, so let's take a look at the next question. All right, so which utility group has the greatest need or desire for real-time analytics? So specifically, there's not a lot of real-time analytics out there right now. Most of us, I think, are dealing with analytics or data that comes in batches. But as we move to the capability for real-time analytics, and now looking specifically at utilities, which group has the greatest need? So the T&D, transmission, distribution, operations folks, the customer service group, the power generation group, energy trading, or this third-party distributed energy resource provider, so something like a Solar City or someone that's outside the utility but is acting to some extent like a utility, providing energy services. So among those, so there's 5 choices here, and let's begin the voting. Hold on till you see the number 9. There you go. All right, so cast your vote. The last vote you cast is the one that will count. And the survey says T&D. You know, that was actually, yesterday at our, I'm surprised with it. I'm curious if you are. At our Grid Edge Executive Council meeting, T&D operations as a, kind of rose to the surface for a lot of people, and it caught me off guard because I was very focused on the customer service group, somewhat based on the last question we just saw. Who voted for number 1 among you? 2 of you? All right. Do you want to explain why, Ellen?
Sure. So I just laid out all the pressures that are on the utility and how the customer's at the center of it. But on this question, I voted for 1 because we're talking about real-time analytics. And we can do real-time analytics. I say we, the industry, can do real-time analytics for customers and for consumers. But we haven't seen the real need for it and the demand for it, that those real-time analytics are really driving way better outcomes than delayed analytics. Because fundamentally, outside of the large commercial and industrial space, most customers don't care enough about their energy use to engage with real-time analytics. Whereas in T&D operations, real-time analytics make a meaningful impact on your business and the decisions that you're making as an operator on a daily basis. And so, knowing in the moment, where usage is spiking, and where demand is spiking, and where you're having distribution issues, just changes your daily work.
Okay, good. Who didn't vote for number 1? Bud? What was it?
I voted for number 4. And I will say it's a really tough question because this is, you could argue all of these should be right there. The reason why I voted for number 4 is because I was reminded of our good friend Jerry Maguire when he said, "Show me the money." And when you get down to it, in this, again, very distributed, highly volatile, very dynamic world, monies and trading and the way that the markets are going to evolve around that are going to become critical. And you only need to look at stock market and other types of examples to find that's where real-time analytics comes into play, is when people are taking positions, moving positions, and deciding what their portfolio mix is going to look like. We're finding in our business that a lot of what we're doing for people on the grid side are resultant towards, minimizing peaker starts, managing fuel costs, managing which generation resource or distributed generation resource is going to be used at what time. And again, as the time of that gets shorter and shorter and shorter, it really comes down to money.
Right. Interesting observation. Craig, how did you vote?
Well, I was with you. I think it's customer service in terms of the greatest need and desire, not the greatest internal budget, not the greatest support of management. Utility customer service across the country is in a crisis right now. The regulators have managed to inflict indices and other measurements on utilities that influence how much the utilities will get in their returns. And the people in charge of those units don't have the budgets, don't have the software, don't have the trained staff. And I'd agree with Bud, that is where the money is. Because when customers get in touch, they're getting in touch usually to say what's going on about the power that's out or what just happened with my bill. And while it is true that it's a really important point that Opower understands better than almost anybody that customers don't want to spend the time themselves to engage with real-time analytics. But they do want to spend the time with someone who is just engaged with real-time analytics on their behalf. And so the empowered customer service representative who can say, yes, I see you've called us 4 times in the last 6 months about this issue, and is in this in connection with the $12.95 adjustment we made a month ago. That kind of standard that's becoming common in other industries is miles away from where this industry is.
That's a good point. Right. David, where did you land on this?
So I voted for the T&D as well, just because it's the bread and butter of the essential keeping the lights on,
Right.
literally and figuratively. On the customer service here, we also see that it's important, but just for our large commercial customers is where we use that, and by and large, the greatest need and desire I saw T&D.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. All right. So the next one. Let's talk about residential utility customers. So by 2020, so just looking out 5 years, 5.5, what percentage of residential utility customers in the U.S. will be engaged in participating in smart home programs enabled by analytics, home energy management systems, et cetera? So I think a key point to make here is it's a residential utility customer, and they didn't just own a smart thermostat. It has to be connected to a utility program, a smart home program. So it's not just owning the smart devices. They have to be engaged in an energy efficiency program by 2020.
And it has to be directly with the utility?
With the utility, yeah.
And
Would
does
you like another clarification?
Yes.
Because we can clarify all we
Yeah.
want, because they haven't voted yet. So.
Does it have to involve a smart device in their home?
Enabled by analytics and home energy management systems. So I feel like the answer to that is yes. The device itself has to be smart. And generating data that an analytics platform can use.
And what's the number for that today?
The number today, I have
Does
no
anybody
idea.
know that?
I'm feeling like it's small.
Less than 5.
Yeah,
Well,
I
for
feel
sure,
like
but
it's
is it
number
1 or
Yeah.
0.5 or?
Yeah.
0.5.
Yeah.
Really closer.
It's answer number 1 today. So is it going to move out of that category? All right, everybody ready? So I will hit the button and then start voting. Should I hit it one more time? I don't want to generate the... There it goes. All right.
That suspenseful pause makes it more like a game show. Or something.
Exactly. All right, here we go. Okay, there's a bias toward a lowish number, but some folks are actually pretty bullish, at least 11%. We're thinking greater than 20% in 5 years. That's pretty good. But a lot of folks thought less than 5 or 5 to 10. So, which I think is realistic. But anyone want to share their vote to start us off?
I was cheating on the definition of engagement because in a lot of the customer work that we do where we're interviewing people in home, they'll be in a utility program that they signed up for. Just to give you an example of one customer whose program was dependent upon having a in-home energy display that was installed properly. He was very proud to have the in-home interview because he said, I've done everything they told me to do. They told me you won't have to do anything, and I haven't. In fact, I was very concerned that my wife or my son might fool around with the device, and they said something about it needing good communications. So he took me out to his garage, and he showed me the custom-built little wooden stool he had created in his garage so that his home energy display could sit right next to his meter.
Okay.
He was very proud it had good communications. He was very proud he'd done nothing with it, including plug it in, since the installer had been there.
Oh, my God.
And he was a participant in the program.
Okay. How did you vote, actually?
I voted for number 1 because we still don't have a good model for residential customers by segment that would lead to active and persistent participation.
Okay. Good answer.
So
David?
yeah, the clarification questions took me from number 5 down to number 2. Just because you're putting those, active engagement in a utility program and having the hardware, I think limits it a lot. I think there's going to be a lot more engagement. It's going to be a lot easier for customers to do more.
Yep.
But
Yep.
it'll be tough to
Okay,
get over
number
there.
2, with the majority.
Oh, I voted for number 1, and I'm proud to say I was in this industry for almost a decade. So, and it's a great market segment, and it's got a lot of really interesting things going on. The clarifying question about engaged in a utility program is the part that drove me down to number 1. Because I actually believe this world will proliferate with smart devices and smart things that will ultimately be doing some form of energy management for customers. But that value prop to the utility, it has not proven itself out. It is not there today. And I will be a bit of a contrarian here and say that for many years I stood on many podiums and said price signals are the future. And boy, price signals are right. But when you get down to it and you, again, start having the in-home interviews as Craig is talking about, and you talk to people and you find out that $10 on a $100 bill allows them to go to McDonald's, they don't really want to eat at McDonald's.
Yeah.
It's not enough to move the needle. So what we're going to find is we're going to find other value props that are emerged, right? Nest is starting to hit on those. All of the other device companies that are starting to really do energy management, but they're not doing energy management as their core value prop. It is a peripheral value prop to something else, like having the best-in-class product or the latest device. That's what's going to change in this industry.
Okay.
And I said 2, and that was with my optimistic hat on. The reason that I think we might be able to get above the 5% mark, I agree with everything that these folks have all said. The reason I believe we might be able to get above the 5% mark is because you have companies like Nest and Google that are pursuing a smart home strategy, but it's a premium segment. They're not going to get to 5% of customers by 2020 with these devices as they're currently priced. However, if you introduce the utility into that, I could imagine utility rebate schemes helping to bring down the price point for some of those devices so that they get broader adoption. But I do agree that if you define engagement as really active engagement, then it's going to be below 5%. I think the only way you get it up, beyond 5% is if you define engagement as they are participating in a utility program because they got that price discount at Home Depot, but they don't really know it. They wouldn't tell you it in an interview. From their perspective, they just bought this cool new device. I think the other thing that could potentially come into play, but I think is not likely to by 2020 in the US, but has potential, is the concept of prepay. So you do have this segment of customers who are lower income customers where that $10 really makes a difference. And I've participated in a bunch of customer interviews where low-income customers on prepay programs literally know how much energy it costs for them to bake a batch of cookies. And they're budgeting, and they are interacting with their utility bill in a totally different way from the standard customer. And so I think if regulators decided to enable prepay to take hold in more places, that'd be another way to get up above the 5% mark.
Okay, good. All right, so this one may also require a little explanation and clarification. So hardware vendors may increasingly build analytic solutions directly into more intelligent devices. And so it's just around this idea that now analytic solutions tend to be a software provider's product that's sold to a utility or any service provider independent of the hardware, but it's starting to increasingly get baked into actual hardware systems. So how do you see the grid analytics market being dominantly defined in 2020? So looking at grid analytics, looking at how now it's generally stratified between hardware and software platforms, how do you see this evolving? So the range of answers are: analytics remains a standalone solution to be integrated with others. Analytics will be an intelligent software feature solution fully integrated with smarter infrastructure assets. And then we get into the sort of SAT answers here. Primarily option A, but a growing trend toward option B. And number 4, primarily option B with a subset of specialized solutions defined as option A. So you may just want to choose 1 or 2 because 3 and 4 are complicated, and you'll have to explain yourself. But so that's what we're talking about. This stratification, is it closing, and how? So let's start the voting. And there you go. All right, 10 seconds. Which may not be long enough to read and understand option 3 or 4. Oh, we got some in the middle there. Okay. So the top choice was number 2, the integration of analytics into hardware solutions. But coming in second was primarily option A, but a growing trend toward option B. I think that's actually where we live right now. Anyone voted for 1 or 4? Like, which one?
1.
1? Okay.
And
you think they're going to stay separate?
Well, a lot of that is just the time frame. That 2020 is not that far off, and the scale of infrastructure that we're talking about takes a really long time to change. I was on the cusp of number 2 or number 1, to be honest, for voting, but it seems pretty clear that, because there's so many types of analytics as well that are going to be developed for so many different things, and the whole landscape is changing, that yes, there will be a little bit of the option B or number 2, but I think it'll stay pretty small. Okay.
Another response?
Yeah. I also said number 1, but I'm particularly interested to see what Bud has to say. The reason I chose number 1 is because I'm seeing a growing trend towards service-oriented architecture, and I interpreted being integrated directly into infrastructure, and hardware vendors as as meaning the analytics is actually part of the device. And with a service-oriented architecture, it just doesn't make sense to do that. It makes sense to have a separate layer of analytics that can be integrated with a whole host of different devices, so that if you're a utility and you end up going through a process of upgrading your smart meters and you choose a different vendor, you still get to keep your analytics layer and your customer intelligence and grid intelligence layer. So.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, bud. She set you up.
She set me up. I will note that you did a great job of controlling the panel and dissuading us from voting for 3 or 4, but not the crowd. So I believe that is the definition of crowdsourcing.
Right.
The one I voted for was actually number 2. And the reason why is because, again, hardware vendors, right? When you look at that, hardware vendors, no matter what market, what industry, what technology they're bringing to bear, they will always try and find ways to differentiate themselves. And software and analytics at the hardware layer will be a way to differentiate. We saw one of the best examples of this yesterday with the iPhone launch, and now iPhone 6 and a smartwatch. And what is Apple doing? They are using software on really good hardware devices, but they are using software as a way to drive differentiation. And every good hardware company will do that. So that, to me, is where there's a lot of potential and a lot of capability.
Will it happen by 2020?
I think, frankly, we're seeing it today, right? Look at a smart. Yeah, look at what Cisco produces for an IPv6 network, and how smart the actual endpoint node is, and the data that's actually coming out of that network. So we were talking here, we're getting kind of wrapped around HEMS and thermostats. Look at what a Nest thermostat does. There's a lot of analytics that goes on inside a Nest thermostat, much more than we know about. So it exists today. I guarantee you it exists today, and it's going to continue to proliferate in 2020. That's my view.
Craig, how'd you come down on this?
Well, I picked option 4,
You
mostly
did?
because I was intrigued by, is it B, is it 1 or 2, or what is it? But I picked number 4 because, frankly, I think there'll be some vendors offering standalone solutions that, in that point in time, that will end up going no place. Because Bud's got it exactly right. Software that integrates analytics into hardware allows hardware to talk to hardware. It allows the results and value of analytics to be automated. Where analytics has trouble delivering value is when individual human beings are involved in either providing the answers, much like today, or in specifying the questions in the first place that are asked. And so if you're looking to make money in the analytics market, and if a certain result occurs, say in a power outage, you can instruct other equipment to behave as it ought to. That's a much more direct route to making money than sitting around with a group of people trying to figure out what should be asked and what it means when the answer comes back. You have the hard job right now with this.
Yes, I'm running analytics here in real time. Okay, let's jump to the next one. All right, the use of analytics is booming across traditional IT market segments. So we're seeing analytics. We had a visitor yesterday at our meeting that talked about data centers, talked about oil and gas. So analytics is clearly not limited to the utility sector. So what is the top challenge in the electric utility industry to push understanding and use of analytics to more mature levels? So because I do feel like in other areas, I mean, certainly in web services and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all that, they have fleets of data scientists on staff now. They're deeply engaged in analytics and using that to make business decisions on a daily basis, very strategic decisions. And I get the sense that utilities are still dabbling. It's still early days, and it's still an education process. So what would help push that understanding to more mature levels? So option 1, availability of stable application-specific technology and solutions. Lack of experienced data scientists in the industry, so addressing the lack of data scientists in the industry. Integration with legacy assets and systems, addressing the lack of understanding and will on the part of the utility. So is it just a fear of new technology and the implications of deploying that, and addressing the lack of regulatory support. So there are your 5. There aren't any weird options in this one, so 5 straight questions. All right, so let's start the voting now. I realize I'm the only one who doesn't get to vote here.
You can just influence
I have the wrong
everybody's
clicker.
votes, so.
Just occurred to you, didn't
I
it?
have the wrong clicker. Okay, so, interesting. All right, so number 3 and number 4 are almost tied. So the winner was lack of understanding and will on the part of the utility. So it really is a behavioral challenge more than a technical one. And then the very close second, integration with legacy assets and systems. Anyone like to start where you voted, David?
Well, I mean, I see 3 and 4 as kind of two sides of the same coin, because I think that the problem is that it's really hard to get access to all the data, but any problem is solvable with enough will. And I don't think that the level of will on the side of the utility is high enough to overcome the barriers of the access to the data. So it's really, so I voted for number 3 as the core issue of the integration and the legacy assets. Because if you could just get the data like this, we've got a team of 12 data scientists that are just focused on all these analytics. And if you can unleash them and all the technology platform behind it, there are huge benefits that utilities love, but taking that step to get it turned on can be a big one.
Okay. Bud, what did you think?
Yeah, so I gave a unique answer, I think, in this group, which was number 5, or at least a fairly unique answer. And the reason why is, one, I think number 5 actually encompasses all the other 4. I'll explain myself by way of a very, very brief story, which is at Imbala we make software, and we joke all the time within Imbala that if only we could put all of our software inside a really, really large iron shipping container and give it to a utility, then it would look like iron, and they could buy it like iron, and they could capitalize
on the
it
front.
like iron. But they can't, right? And so it's not that there's not regulatory support. I mean, everybody wants to do it, but our mechanisms are still wrong to incentivize our utility folks to do this. At the end of the day, the mechanisms are wrong. And when I listen to a utility who's literally struggling to figure out how do I hire that data scientist to put them in my budget, and that means I got to get rid of some call center people, or I got to do, right? It's a huge problem. It is a huge problem.
Do you know of any state that is taking a step in that direction, or is there anywhere to
Well,
point
I
to?
mean, look at what New York is doing, and as contrarian as that is, and there's a lot of debate between utilities and the regulators, and we don't know how New York is going to play out. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a model that says, no, the utility's role is going to change. And when the utility's role changes, their mechanisms are going to change. The way we fund these things are going to change. So I would look there. They're at the beginning of what could be a very different future for how the world of regulatory and utilities works.
Okay, right.
I answered number 4, but number 5 was my close second, I think for similar reasons. And I think it's because utilities today, they're infrastructure companies, they're asset companies. That's how they make their return. That's how they define themselves. That's how they've operated for centuries and how they make decisions. And to make the transformation to being a data-oriented company or an analytics-oriented company is a pretty substantial shift. And I've seen some utilities, their top leadership has made this mental shift, but it takes a long time and hard work and effort for that to filter on down. And the vast majority of utilities still understand that they make their return based on assets in the ground. And it's in stark contrast to, before I entered this industry, I was a strategy consultant, and I worked a lot with American Express. And I remember 15 years ago, I was having conversations with American Express about using data analytics to provide better information to their customers, run their business more effectively. But the difference was they saw themselves as a customer company, and they saw data analytics as one of their core competencies. And I find myself having the same conversations with utilities today that we were having in the financial services industry 15 years ago. And I think it's really about that kind of core mentality of what defines utilities business, which in the end comes down to, from a regulatory perspective, how they make money.
So the regulatory support could give them the will to do it. So
Yes.
4 follows 5 in that line. What do you think, Craig?
I agree that I picked 4, thinking about 5 also in terms of the regulator's roles. Frankly, in many states, if the utility doesn't have understanding and will, the regulators won't either. This is probably the biggest single revolution that's occurred in this industry in 70 years. And it is what happened in financial services 10, 15 years ago that hasn't started yet here. The IT revolution, the internet revolution, transforming the utility business into an information business. They're not there yet. As recently as 3 months ago, my firm finished a smart grid strategy for a major utility. The chief operating officer of that utility called me in for a meeting before the big meeting and said, I want to talk about this because you're referring again and again in this to this information technology stuff. And what we want here is a smart grid strategy that's not dependent on all this information technology. Chief operating officer, major utility, utterly convinced that that was the way to go. So that viewpoint is still out there, still strong enough, so that when all of us are talking to utilities about what they need to do in the analytics realm, there's still a lot of denial. But in this case, denial will be very quickly replaced by acceptance. 10 years from now, people will be saying, of course we have to do that. So we're just on the edge, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay, good. No, that's nice, right? Good discussion. Okay, so this one, as the grid edge, and what we mean by that at Greentech Media is that intersection between the utility and the customer. Sometimes the utility owns that, sometimes now the customer is starting to generate their own power and own that or store it in a variety of activities. So at that grid edge introduces more and more intelligent endpoints in both residential and commercial energy consumers. The amount of user data will grow along with that. Where will the primary ownership of the data reside in 2020? So looking at those endpoints in the network, who will own that data in 2020? So with the user, with the electric utility, or with a third-party service provider? Is someone going to sort of parachute in there and really own that data? Any clarifications, or are we ready?
You needed an option 4, which is I have no idea.
Okay, that's your answer?
No one has any idea.
All right, well, okay. Pick 1, 2, or 3. All right, starting. There we go. 10 seconds. All right. And there's no write-in votes. All right. With a third party, does that surprise anybody?
Yeah.
It does. It surprises all of you. All right. How did you vote? And so you must not have. Did anyone vote for number 3? No. All right, esteemed panel. Opposite our esteemed audience. Tell us about 1 and 2.
Well, I'll start. We're only at the very, very beginning of this privacy argument around data here. And we only need to point to our other friends in other industries around healthcare, financial services, et cetera, and you're going to quickly find that at the end of the day, the user owns the data. They own all the data. They own the transactional data. So that's what led me to that answer. I don't think the third-party service provider, unless it's a very, very strong entity with lots of, we'll call it political support, will get away with actually beginning to own that data. The other part is that I'm thinking of this as raw data. So the actual end user data themselves, the actual raw piece. I think in aggregate, in abstraction, in obfuscation, there are other ways that all the other entities will be able to play with this data, but not the actual raw data itself.
Okay.
So I said number 2, but I think part of it's how I interpreted the question. So I think that there's strong movement for customers to be able to have access to their data. And I see that a lot of places. I see a few folks I know from PG&E in the room who's been one of the leaders in providing access to data to customers, and SDG&E and the California IOUs as a whole have all really been leaders in that area. But when it comes to actual ownership of the data and holding the data, there just isn't interest, I think, from users for them to actually hold the data. And I see this playing out similarly to how it's played out with Google, for example, where if utilities are able to give customers useful services based on that data, then they'll have fewer restrictions about how they're allowed to use it. But if they don't give people they don't give people access to their data, and if they don't give people useful services and tools from their data, then I think they'll very quickly start to see lots of restrictions on how they're allowed to use the data.
I also said number one with the user. I tried not to get too much into the semantics, but really the users have, they have the rights to their own data, and I'd be really surprised if that were to change. I think an interesting question is who else is going to have access to the data and what can they do with it, for sure. And I think that's probably where the big, number three answers were, just thinking about all the different players who are going to have access to do things with the data.
Right.
For sure there'll be growth there, but the fundamental ownership has to stay with the user.
Okay. Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, I would agree that, yes, users will own the data, but ownership will be overrated. Because one of the few things that your average household understands less than how their electric bill gets built is, what are all those people doing with my data? They know it's their data. I mean, imagine people own their data, but how long do most people think before they check the box that says, whatever you want to do with me, whatever's going to happen next, just get me to this website? They check that box. So I think the point about access is critical. Who else has access to this data? And as Bud is saying, the companies that will aggregate the data and frankly do the analytics on the data, regardless of who owns it, those analytics don't have to be shared and won't be shared. So this is only the first of a handful of interesting questions.
Interesting. Okay. Let's see. We've got 4 minutes until lunch, so let's see if we can get through one more. Consumer analytics has been driven by aggregate smart meter data thus far. So by 2020, what will be the primary drivers of advanced consumer analytics and true customer engagement? So our options are the smart meter still. So the smart meter is the point of origination of consumer analytics. Or is the driver the addition of distributed solar and the data that comes off of that, distributed solar plus storage, adding electric vehicles, or a combination of all the above, 5? And I encourage you not to vote for 5. It's sort of a boring answer. It doesn't reflect.
You do have a
here.
vote. Yes.
Yes. I have a bias. I don't have a vote.
Yeah.
But 5 will be boring if you vote for that. Or none of the above. Well, you can't even choose that.
Yes, we noticed.
Okay. So consumer analytics by 2020, the primary driver. Let's start the voting.
Sorry, last second clarification question. Are we talking like for the world or the United States or California?
The U.S.
Okay.
Let's talk about the U.S. You've got 4 seconds.
Oh.
Quick. Wow. I guess we saw that coming. Okay. Anyone? Final thoughts before lunch on this? Nothing beyond
contrary to your advice, I still voted for number 5. And it actually wasn't really because of 2, 3, or 4, or 1. It was that the primary thing that's going to drive analytics is the combination of all kinds of data coming together. One person's single interval data usage pattern coming off of a smart meter, frankly, is not that interesting. When you start to aggregate that with all of the other effects that are going on around that customer, that's when it starts to become interesting. And I'll give a shout out here. We've had a lot of conversation about residential customers in this panel. We do need to not forget our larger commercial and industrial customers, where some of our customers look at thousands of points inside their facility, line that up with their energy, and find amazing things when you start doing that. So it is truly a combination of data that's going to drive this industry. It's not one single thing.
Good. Good more.
Smart meter data, because we're looking at the next 5 years, and because smart meter data has been almost entirely unexplored. For example, in Nevada, we're going to have 2 years of 15-minute data on 5,000 plus customers and also customers in a control group and a non-complier group. That kind of data has never been used in utility rate making before. But for the first time, the utility and the commission are going to engage in a dialogue about what can we find in this data. Rate making does get utilities' attention. So I think for the next 5 years, that's the conversation we'll have.
Okay. Anyone else?
I said 1, but I want to change my answer to 5 after hearing Bud's
Yeah,
answer.
you did a good job,
That was
Bud. That was good.
Yeah, especially because, from a utilities perspective, their large commercial and industrial customers are where the money is. And that's a very challenging place for precisely the reasons that you said. There's so many different devices and applications that they're using, and aggregating all that data together is an interesting space.
All right. David, you get the very last word here.
Is there one more question after this?
No, we're going to lunch.
All right, good.
So-
Well, yes, so for sure, I mean, the combination of all of them is where really the impacts are going to be. And particularly a large commercial and even the small, medium businesses, there's so much, linking it to how their businesses are actually operating
Yep.
and the things that they care about for, their sales and their other expenses. And there's so much to be done there that's really going to give customers a lot more value than they just get from the smart meter data.
Okay, great. Well, you made a boring option exciting and the right one, so thanks. All right, so thank you, everybody, for participating and voting. You can hand in your little voting devices on your way out to lunch. And thanks to the panel for their insights. Appreciate it. Thank you.